So this month we've been studying a code of conduct called the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And Ruiz was a spiritual guide of the ancient Toltec Wisdom teachings. And the Toltecs were a group of scientists and artists who came together with the idea of protecting spiritual wisdom and helping people move from being just their human self into being their God self, into being what God made us to be. And as I read this book, I am always struck by how much it reminds me of the stuff that I learned in this book, our Holy Bible. It's funny how truth is the same wherever you find it. And so that makes it precious to me, that truth. And I'm also struck by how much it reminds me of unity teachings, because it really does. In unity we talk about metaphysics a lot. And for those of you who haven't heard that term, metaphysics means what does something mean beyond just the physical thing about what it says. And in unity, the book, The Four Agreements, has the number 4. In the Bible, the number 4 has a meaning of completion, whatever it takes for completion. And we see 4 a lot in the Bible. We actually see it expanded, and not from just 4, but 40 and 400 and 4,000. Like in the Bible, for example, the number of days, there was 40 days of flood, 40 days and nights. The Hebrews wandered in the desert for how long? 40 years. And how many days did Jesus spend in the wilderness? 40 days. Where he underwent the temptation. So whether the story says 4 or 40 or 400, those are not literal figures. We don't know what the literal number is, but it means the time enough for completion. So the significance for me about the 4 agreements is that if you fully embrace these 4 agreements, you can have a transformation in your life. And that's what we are here for, to transform our lives, to be better in this world, to be able to inspire others to be better. Don Miguel Ruiz says that the whole human race has been dreaming, individually and collectively. He says that we're dreaming dreams that have been passed down to us for years and years and years. There are hundreds of dreams that we've been given, that we've bought into. And you and I might not recognize that because they're taught to us so subtly. It's those dreams that keep us walled up in lack and scarcity and fear and limitation. It's those dreams that keep us from seeing the truth of the beautiful people that we are and the beautiful people that everyone is. The book says if we're willing to make 4 new agreements in our life, we can overcome all of the dreams that have held us back. The first dream we covered, the first agreement that we covered is be impeccable with your word. And your word means not just what you say, but what you think. Because generally speaking, what we think comes before what we say. Most times. Sometimes I do find myself saying without thinking, and I'm always sorry when that happens. But our thoughts and our words are creative, and they are how we create with God. They're how we create our world. And so Ruiz uses the word, be impeccable with your word. And he means that without sin. And sin to him in this case would mean don't say anything that would do harm to you or anyone else. Don't say anything that would diminish you or someone else. Being impeccable with our word means that we're trying to build up, not tear down. When we're impeccable with our word, we're always seeking to say the highest truth. And last week, Reverend Judy talked to you about the second agreement, about don't take things personally. How many of you have discovered how hard that is this week. Our tendency is to think that everything that happens to us has something to do with us. That anything that's said is about us. And that means that whatever somebody else does, they're doing it because of us. It's pretty self-centered. But that's what we do. We take it personally. And when I did this series, one time I managed to make some fans, some old-fashioned, those fans like you used to have when you went to church when it was so hot. And on one side, I put, this is their stuff, and this is my stuff. And then what I did, I really needed to know that more, so I made me an index size card so that when somebody is saying something that is pushing my buttons, I can look at my card and it says, this is their stuff, it's not about me. And when I go to react to something that they say, I have to look at this. This is my stuff. My reaction is my stuff. It's not about them. And so it's really important that we get that, because it's not all about us. And so today's the agreement that we're talking about is don't make assumptions. So I have several stories. There was a man who was in an automobile accident, and he was removed unconscious from his wrecked car and carried to a nearby gas station. And shortly thereafter, he came to, and he looked around, and he violently began to struggle. And eventually he was subdued, and he was taken to the hospital, and they asked him, why did you struggle to get away from the people that rescued you? And he said, well, you see, they took me to the Shell station, and somebody was standing in front of the letter S. And maybe you've read this story. There was a couple that lived in Michigan, and both were going on separate business trips. And because the weather was so bitter, they agreed to meet in Florida for a week of vacation after their trips. And their exact itinerary had not been set when the husband left. So when he got to Florida, he decided to email his wife. And unfortunately, he made a little typo in her email address. And it went to a woman whose husband had died the week before. Her husband, the minister who had died the week before. And when she checked her email, she shrieked and she fainted. And her family came running and they looked at the screen, and this is what the screen said. Darling, even though it's only been a few days, I sure have missed you. I got checked in and asked the desk clerk when you would be arriving. And he said tomorrow noon. I can't wait to see you. P.S. It sure is hot down here. These stories are funny because they're based on assumptions. The assumption the motorist had that he died and he'd gone to hell. And the assumption that the woman made that the email was from her husband. As we all know, assumptions will get us in trouble. We know the saying about what the word assume means. That's the third agreement in the Toltec Code of Conduct. Don't make assumptions. From our earliest days, from when we're little children, we are taught to make assumptions. We were taught because all these assumptions are the glue that hold together this shared dream of separation and fear and limitation. We begin making assumptions long before we go to school. there was a minister who was giving a message in children's church, and she was making the point about the importance of working hard. And so she chose a squirrel to demonstrate that. And so she said, I'm going to describe to you something, and I want you to tell me as soon as you know what that is. And she said, this thing lives in a tree and jumps from branch to branch. Nobody said anything. She said, it eats nuts. And not a child said anything. She paused. She said, it has a long bushy tail. No child raised their hand. The child were looking at each other, funny. And then she said, it chatters and flips its tail. Finally, one little boy raised his hand, and the minister breathed a sigh of relief. And she called him. And the little boy said, well, we're in Sunday school, and I assume the answer must be God or Jesus. But it sure does sound like a squirrel to me. We learn very early on to give the answer that is expected. And we practice at giving the answer we think is expected. Assumptions. I'm going to read a quote from Don Miguel Ruiz. Assumptions create all manner of damage. We have the tendency to make assumptions about everything. The problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We make an assumption, we misunderstand, we take it personally, and we end up creating a whole big drama for nothing. All the sadness and drama you have lived in your life was rooted in making assumptions and taking things personally. Breathe that in. All the drama that you have experienced in your life comes from having made an assumption and taking it personally. Assumptions set us up for suffering. And I suppose in some limited situations, assumptions can be correct and they can be positive. But most of the time, assumptions limit us a little or they damage us severely. They create misunderstandings, big ones, little ones. They create tension in our relationships. They can even alter or destroy our relationships. They impose blocks and limitations of every kind in every area of our life. Assumptions have created conflict, violence, and wars. And they cause much of our unhappiness, confusion, blocked healings, and slow spiritual growth. Now, the power in the assumption comes from the power in our own minds. But it's the misuse of the power of our mind when we are assuming. We take this incredible power that we have, God-given ability to imagine, to envision, to create a sense of opportunity, to vision perfection, possibilities. And instead, we use that creativity to give form and experience to inaccuracies, uncertainties, superstitions, biases, gossip, especially guesses. We sow these seeds, and when we reap them in the world, we wonder why. We wonder why there's war. Comes from these assumptions. So when I walked in this morning, I walked back to that back corner, and there are no accidents in this world. I looked in the Spirituality and Health magazine that was laying there, has an article by Anu Gupta on breaking bias. using mindful compassion to unlearn what divides us. What is a bias? It's an assumption. It's an assumption. It's a lie that we have been told. I grew up in the South in the 40s and 50s. I did not grow up with good assumptions about people who did not look like me. I grew up with misconception. I grew up with fear. I was taught that I was to fear anyone who was black. And we expect that to go away and overnight. I mean, it's not true. I have wonderful black friends. I have people that I trust with my life. This last week I was in the hospital, and I'm going to tell you, it didn't matter to me what color that person was that came in to help me. It didn't matter what color. It didn't matter whether they were a woman or a man. You know, I had biases that nurses were women. I had some great male nurses. Go figure. Yeah. Another bias down the drain. Another assumption. We get these biases and assumptions, and they limit us. And we learn them, and we assume things from that. And the key is that when we're really young, we're taught it is not okay to not know. Do you remember when you were a kid and the message came in, it's not okay for me to not have an answer? Pretty early. And at that time, when that message came in, what were we? We were a bundle of questions. We were curious about everything, and all of a sudden, we were supposed to have the answers. We weren't supposed to be asking questions. We were supposed to know. We got that message. I better have an answer. Even if the question is beyond my years and my understanding, if I don't have an answer, I'm going to get punished, ridiculed, or ignored. And so what do? We learn to invent answers. And we act knowledgeable. We act like we know. And I went to see Maureen Namath. And Maureen Namath is a teacher about money, and she's a spiritual teacher. And she says that everybody has a basic assumption. And she helps you figure out your basic assumption. And my basic assumption is I have to know. And what does that mean? That means that I'm not open to asking questions. Because I'm supposed to know. Gotten me in trouble. Think back to when you were in school and when you were rewarded when you had an answer and you were punished when you didn't. The tragedy in that process is we begin to give up questioning. The wonderful attribute in us, that fabulous attribute of our curiosity and our honesty, is squished down even when we are 5, 4, 6, 8, and 9. Then there are times that we assume because we fear knowing. Have you ever had that? We assume when another's truth or the truth in a situation is threatening. Have you ever been in a situation where it was easier to guess and assume than to ask a direct question? A little vignette just passed through my mind of a couple that the woman came in and she saw the man on the telephone, and when she came in, he said, "Well, I'll talk to you later," and he hung up. And later in the week, she saw him talking on the telephone again, instead of asking him what was going on, she built up all of the stuff about the affair that he was having. He was planning her surprise birthday party. You know, she had a week of misery because she thought he was talking to another woman, having an affair with another woman. It was easier to guess than it was to actually ask and find out the truth. And it happens all the time. So we assume when we don't know or when we fear the truth. We assume when we are out of touch or simply when we're taking liberties with situations in our lives. Why do we make assumptions, and what can we do with this damaging thing? Don Miguel says, if others tell us something, we make an assumption. We don't ask them for the full story. We make up the backstory. You ever done that? I have. We do this to fulfill our need to know and to replace the need to communicate. And I think that's happening more today than ever before, because I don't know about you, I can only text so much. And so when somebody texts something to me, I'm more likely to make up a story about it than I am to text and say, now, does this mean this or does it mean that? Even if we hear something that we don't fully understand, it is our nature of our brain to make an assumption about it, to give meaning, and to come up with something. And Don Miguel says we do that because we have two specific agreements that you and I have made when we were children. One, it's not safe to ask a question. And two, and this is a biggie, if people loved us, they would know what we want or what we feel. Yeah. Every one of us in here has probably at some time been upset because our partner did not respond in a way that would help the way we feel. Can you think of the how much stress this causes in relationships? We could go on and on about assumptions that life partners make about each other. So how do we stop making assumptions? By becoming aware of the assumptions that we make and take action. And what action do we need to take? We need to ask questions. We need to make sure that our communication is clear. If we don't understand, we need to ask. And of course, did I come with a handout with homework? I did. We not only make assumptions in our relationships, in our communications, we make assumptions about events that happen in our lives. A man was shipwrecked. He was the only survivor of the shipwreck, and he was washed up on a deserted island. He prayed and he prayed to be rescued, and he survived the horizon day after day, and nobody came. Finally, he built himself a little thatch hut and got driftwood together, and so that he could have some shelter and be protected. And one day he was out hunting for food, and there came a big thunderstorm, and lightning struck, and when he came back, his hut was on fire, burning totally, smoke bellowing in the sky, and he fell down on his knees, and he said, "Why, God, why? Why are you doing this to me? I'm barely making it. Now this." He was so exhausted, he laid down in the sand and went to sleep, and only to be awakened by the horn of a ship. He was being rescued. And when they had him on board, he asked, "How did you find me?" And they said, "Well, it was the smoke signal that you sent." When we find ourselves in one of life's situations, we need to ask the question, what's burning in my life? Is something afire? What is the spiritual message? What is the hidden opportunity, the hidden blessing? What have we assumed that is blocking our greater good? And when we explore our circumstances, and more importantly, explore our relationships, what hasn't been spoken that needs to be spoken? What needs to be said? Has our relationship been kept on the surface when it could be so much deeper? This is where we do the most damage with our assumptions, right in our own relationships. And the second way that we can stop making assumptions is to find our voice to ask for what we need or what we want. Everybody has the right to say no or yes or no. And when somebody asks us for what they need, we have the right to say yes or no. But it's so empowering when we really know what somebody needs. Jesus teaches us this in the Bible when he says, let your voice say yea, yea, or nay, nay. And have you ever noticed that when somebody asks you how you're doing, you say fine? Now, I'm not going to tell you the southern meaning of fine. The acronym I'm going to tell you is feelings inside, never expressed. What if we never speak our own truth? What if we always make assumptions about others and never go deeper? What if somebody acts cold and we assume that they're bored or don't really like us, rather than exploring to find out that they might really be afraid about something? Or if someone seems a little hostile and we assume the worst, rather than exploring to find out that they're hurting about something. The day we stop making assumptions, our word becomes impeccable. With clear communication, all our relationships will change for the better. And just for a moment, remember our first song about, what was that first song? No, not Happy Days. What was the other song we sang? Wonderful World. What if we all assumed that? What if we all looked and thought it was a wonderful world? How would that change your life? If everyone communicated clearly, there would be no wars, no violence, and no misunderstandings. All human problems would simply fade away. By making this one agreement a habit, our whole life can be completely transformed. By opening our mouth and telling our truth. What we need comes to us easily because then Spirit moves freely through us. The goal of the Toltec was to master life. The everlasting truth is that if you and I will commit to being impeccable with our words, to not taking things personally, and to not making assumptions, we are committing to a path of personal freedom. And every Sunday we get in a circle and we say, peace begins with me. As long as you're doing these things, peace does not begin with you. In other words, if you are making assumptions, if you're not speaking impeccably, and if you're taking things personally, peace doesn't begin with you. But if you do speak impeccably, don't take things personally, and not make assumptions, then you can know that peace is beginning with you. And that, my friends, is really the truth.